Hello KMI viewers, welcome back to KMI Community Connect again. Today is going to be an interlude for the session or the explanation that I gave for you in Metabolism Made Easy Part 9. I understand that I went a little bit deep into the biology, into the biochemistry, the physiology, some mention about little bit about genetics at the end, and a little bit mention about molecular biology, and that's the classical approach. I'm going to put that approach later when I finish saying what I have to say here. We are also going to extend that classical approach to look at it from a different angle, because that is where the science is going in terms of understanding things in a bigger perspective than just those three aspects. But I want to revisit the three aspects of pillars of what I spoke last time, is about the molecules that we talked about, the ADP, the ATP, then the AMP kinase, the enzymes. These are all the molecules. That is the molecular biology. We also talked about the genes that control that, that is the genetics. And we also talked a little bit about the physiology, which is making fat, storing fat, or burning fat. So that's the physiology part, and then the underlying part is all the chemistry that goes along with the physiology. But I want to explain a few things to kind of more make it more clear. I want to dissect what I spoke last time for you to understand more about these molecules. When I said mitochondria, everything is happening in the mitochondria and is happening in the liver, and that's the source of energy. Energy is the source of everything. You can compare it to something like cash, because without cash you cannot live. For everything that you do, we need cash. So there is a cash which is like a higher currency, which is ATP, a little bit less currency, which is two molecules, which is ADP, and then AMP, which is the lowest denomination. So whenever your pocket money comes to less, then we keep refilling that pocket. That's how you can give an analogy to make it more money to go back to ATP. So that's the currency. So everything that I talk, when I say two phosphates are released, one phosphate is released to become one. So what you have to understand is, when we are doing any kind of work, let's say I'm just moving my hands, speaking, or even just sitting. So when I'm just sitting, my heart is beating, my lungs are breathing, I'm just blinking my eyes, or when I'm talking, walking, doing any kind of work, that work is done by this phosphate molecule, by the release of this phosphate molecule, because this molecule that is released is making us do all the work. And once that is released, and then you become only one phosphate molecule, you need the phosphate molecule again to add to make it run. Otherwise, it will be going in only one direction. So that is what uric acid does. It doesn't make and keep refilling those phosphate molecules back to keep our system going. So when I said glucose, almost 80 to 90% of it keeps recycling and is usable for our energy. And when fructose, 100% of it doesn't do that, and it stays in AMP, that means your pocket gets empty, and then it keeps empty. That means you don't have energy. That means you feel tired. So in the first 3 or 4 back when I talked about fructose and what it does, I said that it causes a transient loss or depletion of energy. That means your pocket money is empty and you feel tired, and that is how nature has designed it. So why did that happen? Because why nature has designed something for that kind of a mechanism, which is an alternate pathway, because nature is never wrong. It does things in a certain way. But that is, for understanding that, we need to understand a little bit more about evolutionary biology, not just the physiology part, but also a little bit about comparative physiology with our other mammalian counterparts, and also a little bit about the history and also the anthropology and things like that, because that is very important for how our genes are controlled. And if we lose any of one of those genes as human beings during evolution, and if animals have that, and if they can use those genes for times of stress and times of famine or times of lack of food availability, and when we have adapted differently and we lose that gene, that is when maladaptation happens. So that is the important perspective that I would like to bring about later, a little bit more in detail when I finish talking about this in the next few topics. So that's the evolutionary link. I'll just give a brief idea about that. But today what I want to do is, there is a gene that there is an enzyme that is called uricase. Uricase is an enzyme that actually destroys the uric acid, so that you remember when I told you there's always a feedback mechanism, so that once the production is done, it says that I'm done. So the same thing should happen. So human beings lost uricase, and we started accumulating more, because we don't destroy the uric acid. We started accumulating more uric acid in our blood compared to our mammalian counterparts, who only have 1 or 2 milligrams per deciliter, when I said we have 5, 6 like that. So that is what has happened during evolution time. So when that uric acid goes up, we are not able to perfectly manage our weight, because this pathway goes more towards making more fat, like I told you. But why does that happen? We can bring a little bit of evolutionary perspective here again. So as human beings, as well as our mammals, and every animal has learned how to survive periods of food shortage and also famine. So when that happens, our bodies have learned how to protect ourselves by developing alternate pathways or mechanisms for those periods of food shortage by making fat. So making fat was a protective mechanism for surviving the periods of famine or periods of food shortage. So our bodies have known how to switch from having food surplus to periods where you don't have food, which is famine. So that is where these pathways come, and they are governed by those genes and those molecules, and it has a close interaction with the environment. So if you see the animals out in the winter, for the coming winter, what happens is the animals like chimpanzees, orangutans, our mammalian other counterparts, even hummingbirds and squirrels and all, they feed a lot on these ripe fruits, which is fructose, to feed, and then are getting prepared for the famine time that's going to come, or food shortage that's going to come during hibernation. And they want to be able to store all that energy, which is the fructose that they eat, a lot of ripe fruits, orangutans and all those bears in particular. So this pathway gets activated for them, and that stores the fat, which means this uric acid pathway gets activated. And come summer or when the springtime, when everything grows back, they are able to perfectly switch off this, and then switch on this pathway for utilizing for energy and come back, because this is all designed for hibernation, to make more fat, store more fat, perfuse the brain when there is no food, increase the blood pressure. So it's actually a protective mechanism that the animals have developed. So learning how to develop this protective mechanism for storing fat is very important in the evolution, and they perfectly do that. Because if you see in the animals, in experimental animals, animals very perfectly control their weight, and they exactly know how to use that weight by storing fat, and how to make that stored fat useful for them for energy during periods of famine or starvation, and then switch back. So it's actually a switch that I was talking about last time. The AMP kinase is one switch, AMP deaminase is one switch. It is just flipping that switch based on the environment. But for human beings, when we lost that gene and we keep accumulating this, and it is an environmental mismatch, because we generally don't face that much of food shortage nowadays with food famine. The winter, that's never coming, we have plenty of food. So we are activating a pathway by eating all those fruits and extra fruit juices, actually not even fruit is actually okay, fruit juices and all things like beer and other processed things which are fructose, and bread and all the processed foods. When there is no food shortage, we are activating this pathway, and that is what is the important thing that we have to realize. While animals, even in experimental models, even if you force feed them with tubes and make them very heavy and fat, the moment you stop that, they are able to perfectly manage and go back to their previous weight by nicely switching that switches the AMP kinase and AMP deaminase, which is storage and then usage. So, using or utilizing, they are able to perfectly do that. So, you never see animals getting obese out in nature, because that is what nature has designed this for. So, today that is the link that I wanted to talk about, because this is very important. There is an evolutionary environmental mismatch for what we are doing, and we are sending the wrong signals, because we have been driven with the caloric theory. The caloric theory is, let us say I put 100 calories of rice and 100 calories of spinach is not the same thing. Similarly, if I have to add fructose, 100 calories of beer, which is fructose, and 100 calories of even something like beans is not the same, because everything from fructose goes straight out 100% into making fat when you process it. I am going to go more in detail about concentration, speed with which it is absorbed, how fiber stops it. There are more details to come, but how fructose and glucose are different, and how those ATP molecules, which is energy, which is cash, causes a temporary depletion of energy, makes you more hungry to store, and why this is designed for animals out in the nature, and how it works so perfectly, and how we do not have this gene during evolution, and how we make more, and how all the metabolic processes are driven with this. This is the same mechanism that is happening everywhere, and how we are not able to switch from fat burning mode to fat storing mode properly. Only in one mode we are going this way because of the types of foods. It is the quality of foods that is important. So, today I am going to mention a very important thing. If all of you are very caught up and in a kind of a dogma or entrenched in a theory of a calorie of this what I mentioned here is not equal to a calorie. They are all different, they go through different pathways. So, if you are entrenched with this dogma of a calorie, and every food is different, how much is absorbed, how the way this pathway works, the way for that pathway works, how we are designed, and what is the state of our body, these are the things that you are going to be learning more and more in Metabolism Made Easy, because it has to be applied. So, my purpose of revisiting this topic today as an interlude is actually to kind of make it more clear for you, to give an understanding and a connection between what actually we need to know, because this is where the science is going. You know, we mentioned about physiology, one pillar, and then we also talked about the molecular biology. I talked about physiology, I talked about molecular biology, and then I also talked about the other pillar, which is the genetics, the genes that control all these molecules. But the bigger picture that we all want to know, that I added when I added the environment and evolution and millions of years when human beings and animals are evolving, is the evolutionary science. So, the classical model is this that I started, that is pure science. Then the applied science that I am giving you right now is the evolutionary science that you have to know, because this is where the science is going to apply this more. And then we also have to know more and more about the contemporary physiology of animals, the animal contemporary physiology, and then not only that, we need to know more about genetics, the history for evolution. The history, because unless we know the history of how things change, and then also we need to know more about anthropology, which is how we are adapting to time and changes. And so, this is mostly what I am talking about, is the genes, the physiology and all. That is the bigger aspect, that the biggest cloud that influences everything, that switching from one thing to another, mismatch of the signals that we give, is the what is called as the epigenetics. That means you may have genes which is only 20% control, 80% is the epigenetics that matters, the signals that we give. So, with this I am going to stop now, and I am going to go more detail into other things, because this is very important for you to understand why I was talking a little bit more about the energy ATP, why you want this and all that. This is all within us and we can always activate it. It's very powerful, and if you understand this, you will be able to do a lot better by giving those signals. The signals are all within us. I will see you very soon for Metabolism Made Easy Part 10. Thank you.